pin in, yes, pin in, please. Sorry, just one last tech thing here. Okay, so, well, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time. Basically, we are a group of people who are interested in Charles Taylor from all over the country. So we've got students here from New York, Chicago, Georgia, Mississippi, Indiana, California, and here we are in Los Angeles, and it's been a week of intensive seminar hosted by Lumen Christi and by the Nova Institute here. And basically, we've done kind of a deep dive into your thought, somewhat in sequential order. And we've had very, very spirited seminar discussions, very provocative. And what we thought we'd do is we prepared questions for you that are in a kind of sequence. And so almost like an anti-atomistic collective act of questioning, or a strange kind of multi-voiced interview, if you like. But the first thing we wanted to start with is just a congrats on Cosmic Connections, which I was showing it off to the students. And in fact, just yesterday, we had a great conversation on the conversions chapter in A Secular Age, and in which you speak about the sort of priority of beauty for modern people to reconnect with the transcendent. And so then, of course, we had very, there are a lot of philosophers, literature people in the room. We had a very spirited argument, debate over, well, if you put beauty first, what does that do to truth, or what's the connection between that? And so I thought I would have first Stella, who has a question to articulate for us on that.
Okay.
Hi. Yeah, well, I guess my question is, we were talking about the kind of fact value split in naturalism, and how kind of in some philosophical ideas we have a fact, and we say that it doesn't push us towards a certain value judgment. But kind of, we were talking about within a secular age, that this is kind of usually not the case, that usually a fact and value can't really be split up. They coincide a lot of times. So in terms of poetics, my question is, do you think that beauty has an implicit morality to it? And like after that, do you think that beauty could lead us astray in certain cases, or does it necessarily have like a backing in the good and the true? And then kind of after that is that, what do we do then with like beauty as subjective, or yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it would be a mistake to think that sentences, let's say, or assertions are either about truth or about beauty, but not about both. I mean, what's much more to the point is that experiences, for instance, experience I might have somewhere, to say, is this about beauty or about truth, may be the meaningless question to me. That is something that deeply moves me, and that to me counts as some kind of beauty, but it's part of what makes it very moving is that I feel I'm into something very, very important, deep and important, right? So, when I'm listening to the Bach B minor Mass, the glory of the B minor Mass is one of the absolutely great heights of music. Am I being moved by beauty or by truth? I mean, at that point, I would say, no, that's a meaningless, that's absolutely senseless question here. I wouldn't know how to parse it, But on the other hand, there are certain kinds of beauty which I might think is associated even with evil. I mean, so you see what I mean? The classification is really the types of classification and where you can distinguish and where you can not distinguish is so varied that it really is, the question doesn't engage with actual experience.
Okay.
What do you do as a strategy, Charles, if you don't mind, as a follow-up on this? If someone says something that one's first intuitions are coming out of one's philosophical tradition, you think, well, that's just manifestly evil, but they're saying that's really beautiful at the same time. So it seems like there's a kind of attempt to conjoin the beautiful with something one other, or even propaganda. You know how propaganda can be really, really beautiful sometimes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
No, yeah, I think that's a possible non-combination, total non-combination, right? But that exists in in the same world as I have my B minor mass, which is where it's totally indistinguishable, right? But at the other end of the spectrum, there are things of that kind uh, that where there is both beauty and horror at the same time. Something is beautiful and it's horror. Yeah, yeah,
Well, I mean, I'm thinking about, how we have to make distinctions, but you're kind of saying that how can we distinguish between kind of the beauty of something and then the truth of something or the goodness of something? But then, in terms of when the beauty and evil are together, then we have to make a distinction. So, I mean, I understand what you're saying, but I don't know. I think it seems a little bit.
yeah. I mean, the famous line of Keats, which I actually quote in the book, but beauty is truth, and truth, beauty. That is all you know and all you need to know. And uh, can we give a truth value to that proposition? Well, yeah, but only if we are thinking of certain experiences of beauty, certain manifestations of beauty, which have this totally fused quality that they're inseparably giving us a truth and moving us the way beauty does. And I think that whether the examples that I mentioned, but I can mention others, are that kind. But the fact is, as you say, that it's quite possible for these two judgments to be, split from from each other. See, but what we have is a field of experience are removed at one level or another. And there's all sorts of things in that field of experience, from the fusion cases to the cases where we're removed, but we're dubious if this is really something worthwhile or deep truth, or we get to the other end of the spectrum where they're obviously categorically opposed. But a terrible beauty is born. So, is another line that comes to mind, right?
Terrible beauty. Yeah, that's a wonderful line. Thank you, Stella. And so we were going to move on because we wanted to sort of give a sense of retracing a path that we took. And we began the week with your famous pieces defending the thesis that humans are a self-interpreting animal, including What is Human Agency, Self-Interpreting Animals, and excerpts from Sources of the Self. And I think all of us understand that these are phenomenological arguments that you're making about the conditions of the possibility of a self, terms like strong evaluation and moral frameworks. But questions did emerge during discussion that people took different sides on, and so Alex is going to help us articulate one of those.
Hey, good morning, Professor. Yeah, so one question we had when we read Sources of the Self was how these transcendental or quasi-transcendental arguments about selfhood work. So there was one seminar participant who comes from the analytic tradition and asked early on if these were necessary logical truths or perhaps necessary in some other way. Could we imagine non-self-interpreting selves? Or is that a kind of contradiction or unthinkable absurdity, like saying a square triangle?
Yeah. Well, it depends what you mean by a self. I mean, there's a sense in which even non-linguistic animals have a sense of self because they shy away in a certain way when they feel that they're directly attacked or threatened. So when you get to the human animal, or inducted into language and grown up and so on, then there is there's a there again the two are not absolutely connected. I could go on with a sense of myself and sense of well-being for me, or then in other phases not happy where I am and so on. But the point about interpretation is that we come to the point of actually using language. We give a cast to our experience. And one of the things you find is that people's interpretive range concepts are very often very different, and you can't quite find your feet in someone else's. This is the case where you sit down with somebody and you recognize early on that you have a different sensibility about all sorts of things. I'm thinking about religion and spirituality and so on. And then you try to explore it. And it's obvious that the palette that the other person is operating on doesn't fit with yours. And you have the question, am I really, can we learn from each other? I mean, does this enrich my own? But there is always this palette of interpretations that people have available to them to make sense of their different experiences. And I would argue human life is just not possible without that. Without, that was a good experience, a bad experience, a meaningful experience, a deep experience, a life-changing experience. All these things, these are just the categorizations. Behind them is a lot of language. Why is it a life-changing experience? Well, I can explain previously, etc. You don't have a human life without some such, range of possibilities. But the really problematic thing is that human life contains an immense variety of these, and sometimes you get cultures that are so different that it takes you years to understand each other.
Thank you.
But does that get to the
No, that makes a lot of sense. If I can just put in here that, so in a way that, because since you moved in some ways from the analytic to the phenomenological tradition, there's a sense in which necessity is used in a different way within phenomenology, because as you said, and I just want to underscore for the students, that an animal might be said to have a self. It's not the same phenomenological self as a human person has. Is that correct? Am I understanding that?
That's right. Yeah. Because in some minimal sense of self, animals know you're well disposed, you're feeding them, or they know that you're threatening them, and so on. They react immediately to that. But obviously, that's if you like to speak in a human way, that's the interpretation they're putting on the experience they're having with you, right? Wary or fearing and running away, or sense of is some beneficence here, and the squirrel creeps closer, hoping to drop the nut.
Yeah, and there is that whole big issue, obviously, with like Heidegger and the poverty of animals and how impoverished an animal's self is or not, and all this sort of thing. But I did want, I assigned to the maximum as much of your writing as I could, and I wanted to tell the students there's an argument of yours of what is a transcendental argument, right? Like what, and I don't remember the exact title, but it's in Philosophical Arguments. So, and there you get a really deep dive into this very issue of like what makes for a phenomenologically transcendental argument. Is that correct, Charles?
Yeah. Transcendental arguments are arguments that, the taking the experience we're obviously having, that couldn't be so without, X, right? That, so there's a certain transcendental argument involved in the distinction between strong and weak evaluations that I make, right? That this comes across to us as we're operating some choice. So it's just based on the way I feel. I like vanilla ice cream rather than strawberry, or you get something like, this is really central to my identity and central to human identity. See, so, and of course we could always be wrong, but we can't have experience which is devoid of that sense. In some cases of this is a weighty issue, in other cases, that's how it comes across. It just, it's
and it's amazing. It's amazing how much it's amazing how much you can extract from that in the social sciences. Since I'm in a political science department, how many senses of self are, different in some. And in fact, after thinking about some of your basic ontological commitments, we read many of your essays rigorously criticizing the attempt at mechanism in the human sciences, including seminal essays, Interpretation in the Sciences of Man, Neutrality in Political Science, and Cognitive Psychology, which, by the way, has aged so well in the age of like AI and everyone's saying their car is intelligent or their phone is intelligent. But one thing that I love about your essay is like, in a certain sense, it's not any more intelligent than a hammer is. Like, it's just relative to a subject. So it's really a bewitchment. But we saw that as a humanist St. George, you can try to slay all the dragons of naturalism, but they keep coming back because they're animated by sort of strong evaluation or sense of self, which is one of the things I love most in your philosophy when you sort of realized that and went deep into that it's a repressed ethical program. You could keep trying to get rid of behaviorism or cognitive psych, but it keeps coming back, even when it's not a success in its own epistemological terms. But we had a good running discussion throughout various seminars on the punctual and disengaged self. And one of the many questions we engaged there with will be voiced by Charlie here.
Hello, thanks for being here. So yeah, like Professor Blakely was just saying, we've been talking about this a lot, and we know that you're a great neo-Hegelian thinker of apparent opposites. So I guess the question is here is, do you think that the natural disengagement of the punctual self, as you've talked about, is bad when applied to humans? Can it actually be good when applied to objects? Or is it bad when applied to objects as well, since it can lead to an overestimation of control and ecological crisis? So I guess, could you just say a bit more about how disengagement and the desire for control can be both good and bad?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that sometimes let's say I'm a surgeon and this is my brother on the table and so on. Sometimes you have to control all the reactions that are to set them aside because it could lead you to, do a very bad job. And so, yeah, you get that kind of thing perhaps very often. And or if you're marking essays, you have, a lot of sympathy with this person and very little sympathy with that person. But just a minute, if you begin to, push the marks so that they reflect that as against, so me marking mechanistic students, well, I mean, I've got to suspend my views on this in a sense and have a kind of not aesthetic, but a kind of detached sense of what really are clever, good, deeper arguments and less deep arguments, on the basis of which I'm going to give this essay an A or B or whatever. See, so you're called upon in life sometimes to suspend. What's the word? I mean, what's the there's a phenomenological word for that, but
bracket, maybe bracketing.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, to bracket these, and at other moments you're called upon, or you just feel, irresistibly that you have to act out of your very strong feelings, commitments, and so on.
Thank you, Charles. And I will also put in a recommendation here. And I know that you're good friends with Hartmut Rosa, and he's very influenced by you. But one of the best pieces of phenomenology I've read in recent time is the whole uncontrollability of the world, where he takes your notion of disengagement, but then applies it to, in a weird way, when you try to control the natural world, you can overdo naturalism or disengagement with the natural world, weirdly, which is a really fascinating area. I don't know if you want to say a word on that before we moved.
Well, I mean, we are doing that all the time. We're destroying the planet, destroying our surroundings. I mean, one of the things about the natural world is immense systemic character, where everything is connected to everything else in different ways. And we are, in a sense, our science is always inadequate. Because we're blundering in to get X done, but that inevitably connects up with Y in various ways, unless we try a totally different way of doing that. But we don't see for a long time that we're producing something in the Y domain, which is actually very damaging in this case, greenhouse gases. And we'll probably never come to a point where we've figured out all the angles. So it's really very difficult and requires great caution and a great sense of the possible downsides. And this is something that that our immense satisfaction with ourselves as agents of control since the 17th century in our culture. This immense satisfaction makes it hard for us to recognize this.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
we think
wonderful. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, no, you've got in there the sort of hidden positivity and negativity of control. Like it's not just one or the
No.
other, it's a gains and losses thing. I've got Ian up here because we read both your essays from the 70s and 80s from the storied and perhaps bygone skirmishes between procedural liberals associated with Rawls and so-called communitarians, which I try to tell the students was massive when I was in grad school, but Trumpism and everything else has sort of blown it away. But what has remained very relevant, revisiting those essays, was your critique of an over-atomistic and procedurist liberalism in essays such as What's Wrong with Negative Liberty and Locke's Punctual Self. But we also saw your deep and sympathetic defense of a more social liberalism that values the affirmation of the ordinary and the ethic of authenticity. Still, as you know, it's hard times for liberalism today. And so students had questions. A lot of very smart, Catholics or others people, sensitive people feel like liberalism is sort of done and dusted or exhausted as a tradition. And Ian is here to sort of voice, not as a personal conviction, but as something coming out of the group discussions, Yeah.
Yeah, good afternoon, Dr. Taylor. Thank you so much for being here with us. Your criticisms of atomistic and proceduralist liberalism are way ahead of their time, yet many of your readers and admirers accept those arguments that liberalism struggles to articulate its strong evaluation and that its atomism or opportunity concept of liberty can bar the ability to secure communal goods. But many of these readers go on to simply apply this analysis to the whole liberal tradition. We may lament it, but many young Catholics think liberalism is exhausted. What would you say to this group? Why not give up on the liberal tradition?
Well, I think we have to clarify what we're talking about here, because I think very different things are now talked about as liberal. When I was writing that stuff, there was another kind of the Rawls era, and liberalism tended to mean don't get in my way, give me space, and even working out what a decent society was involved complicated, imagined individual decisions. I mean, what kind of I can be born in this society or that society? What kind of society do I want to be born in? But there I was condemned as a communitarian. The communitarian being people who think that you need to have a decent society. In order to have a decent society, you need a lot of very powerful common culture. But nowadays, when in the Trump era, if you like, when people talk about, well, Democrats are more liberal, they mean something quite different. They mean that they don't want to say that, that Mexicans are criminals, that they would think that you've got to listen to a Mexican and see what he's like before you make these kind of judgments and make these kind of exclusions. So suddenly the word liberal is flipped around, and it's on, in a certain sense, on the other side. It's on the side of people being open, trying to understand each other, allowing space for people who are very different. Yeah, there is a kind of overlap, but I mean, you have to have lived through this change to feel how different it is in the, let's say, 50s, 60s, I get confused, I've lived a long time, 70s, the world, on one hand, and today on the other. So I think what we really need to do is make the distinction between different kinds of liberalism. There's or different facets of liberalism. I mean, this is the thing that makes us, if we're liberal in this sense, makes us feel that these immense preconceptions of other people as being dangerous and so on. Particularly Muslims. I mean, I'm having this big battle in Quebec with the exclusionary legislation against women wearing the hijab and so on, and which exists even worse in France. Well, liberalism here means, no, I mean, this is a human being, they're different, but they're not operating with ill will. They want to make their contribution to our society, give them space. On the other hand, go back to the Rawls era, and it's precisely because in order to have a democratic society, you need a very powerful common ethical culture, including giving people faith, right?
Mhm.
That's something that made people nervous then, that maybe I'm going to be fenced in a certain way. See, I mean, the people who are in U.S. politics, people who are libertarian, are that kind of, no one
Mhm.
should tell me if I should get vaccinated. Oh, I mean, I'm going to visit grandma and I'll probably kill her off because I haven't been vaccinated, I think. But who cares? I'm a human being and I have the right to. That is the bad side of liberalism.
Yeah, and I always wish, honestly, with the new post-liberals, that I always just want to say, but there are many liberalisms, just like there are many Christian traditions, but somehow they can't make that move. It's like, and I do feel like they sort of borrowed some of, I mean, you're very big with the post-liberals, believe it or not, because some of your arguments are so good against atomistic liberalism that if you just grab those and then apply them,
Yeah,
it's not sociologically or interpretively accurate, but then they're very powerful to sort of own the libs, if you know
yeah,
what I mean.
yeah.
Actually, Ian's parents are from Canada. He asked earlier this week if you had weighed in on the hijab. I don't know if you want to say anything about that, or are you good, Ian?
Yeah, no, I was just curious when that news struck, kind of, what your initial impulsive reaction was to it, since multiculturalism, in the way that it was written, seemed to, articulate something to defend like the cultural rights of, the Quebecois. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, I just wanted to hear your initial impulse reaction, any thoughts you've developed on that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that with the particular context that we're in, with all the international migration, but also with all the new understandings of identity, is that we are going to live, whether we like it or not, with very, very different people. Now, how do we make a democratic society here? And it seems to me evident that unless there's some very strong reason, something very damaging will happen, we have to allow each other this space. And even, I would go farther. I think it's a virtue of a democratic society, and it makes it operate better as a democratic society if people not only feel they shouldn't stop other people from doing what they do, like wearing the hijab, but if they really exchange, there's something very important about this. It's actually enriching to one's own life to get to know people of a rather different culture, religious belief, background, and so on. I personally found it that way. And I find here, I'm speaking as someone who is working, fighting in the political realm. I find that we begin to win the argument against the people who want to say you can't wear the hijab. We begin to win it with actual younger generation usually, who not only don't want to do this kind of thing because it's kind of bad, but actually have found their lives enriched by their experience of contact and exchange with the other. So that you have a very powerful, as it were, powerful force there to bring about the right the right rules
Right.
of the game for a democratic society.
Thank you. And on the flip side, before we leave liberalism behind, we did have a Kantian or two in our midst, so liberalism never quite go away. Specters of liberalism in that sense, and
Yeah.
Kantianism, is something that offers a very sort of interesting or like point of relation to your whole political philosophy and political theory. And so Lewis is here to ask a question about Kant and how you might assess him. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for being here, Dr. Taylor. So Kant is critical of rationalism, which operates on pure a priori concepts as the condition for human cognition, for overstepping its boundaries of natural science. However, in his ethics, he seems to fall into the same proceduralism as his rational predecessors with the formulations of the categorical imperative, for example. Although there seems to be something attractive about the kingdom of ends, as idealistic as it is, his commitment to deontological formalism makes him unable to account for the famous murder at the door. So I'm curious, is there something in Kant that's redeeming given your criticism of a sort of naturalism, or does Kant's scientific approach to ethics lead to an unintuitive picture for the self-interpreting animal or human?
Yeah. But I mean, yes, I agree with you, particularly the example there. I mean, when Kant sees these rules as so utterly inflexible that you can't lie to the murderers. Where's George? Anyone else would say he's gone out to lunch, you know. That's your human reaction, but it seems to me that ruling that is because he gives this ridiculous argument that maybe you actually had gone. Yeah. Anyway, so I don't think you need to go to those extremes, but I have a problem with Kantianism, with the Kantian dimension, because it puts it all in terms of I can't. I have to respect your life because I want my life to be respected, and I have to be operating under a rule in which either of us could benefit from the rule. But there's another dimension to ethics or morals. Now, I say ethics or morals because very often these two dimensions are distinguished by the word morals in one case, the set of rules, things we shouldn't do to each other, and ethics, which smells of not Kant, but Aristotle, right? And if you have to ask, partly Kantian, but I'm partly basically Aristotelian, that there are certain things that make a human life richer, fuller, and that's important. Now, the odd thing is, everybody recognizes this in the modern world in one case. The case of my picking my vocation, right? So everyone recognized the story. You know, I want to be a concert pianist, but my parents say, no, you have to have a breadwinning capacity. So, you know, you go there and learn to be a doctor or something like that, and then you can worry about it. But by that time, years of practice at the piano have been lost, and so on that score, people recognize there's something. I mean, what are we talking here? People sense that I would have a much fuller life if I became a great concert pianist, right? Not you, not everyone. But I believe that there are things that are common to all human beings, not particular to me, which are in the same category. And I would say that, I mean, in this particular case of giving others space, giving others rights, following the Kantian road, there's another side of it. It can be seen through the lens of ethics, that there's something very incomplete and narrow in a human life where there isn't at least a potentiality for a great sense of sympathy, which makes you want to reach out and help other people, right? So here we have ethics and morals aren't in separate categories. They're like two ways of acceding to the really desired behavior. One is you'd like just to ignore them, but you're caught up in the Kantian idea that we owe it to each other. But the other is that it's a fuller human life. The life really moved by agape is a fuller human life. There's something admirable in itself there. And these are, I just don't conceive of, I'm not satisfied with, if you like, a value theory, which is purely in the moral realm of the rules of the game, or the do's and don'ts, and doesn't have this dimension, even not just when it concerns my own vocation, but when it concerns what it is to have a full human life.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And I did recommend to Lewis because he's a very articulate defender of Kant. Your essay on Kant and political freedom, I think it's in the Cambridge papers, where you kind of almost try to give an Aristotelian narrative of Kant and like what his vision of the good is. Well, we recognize you as one of the most formidable theorists and defenders of multicultural political philosophy. As part of this, we read your game-changing piece, The Politics of Recognition, as well as your extremely rich critique of nationalism and modernity. Many of us were persuaded by your defense of multiculturalism, but others remained with questions or had dilemmas that they wanted to explore further. And Cephas is here to help us pose a question on behalf of those who would like to think deeper into these issues. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor, for being here. I really appreciate it. This is wonderful. some of your work contains the claim that there is now a kind of rationally legitimate and unavoidable pluralism, i.e. that the law of non-contradiction alone does not sufficiently settle the issue of contesting value systems. And I think this brings with it a rather favorable view of multiculturalism as a desirable, or at the very least, necessary component of modern political life. My question then is, what criteria a framework or cultural system would have to meet in order to merit condemnation and be incompatible with a healthy multiculturalism? So is there a kind of, and maybe one part of this question is whether or not particular cultures always suppose a value system or value framework, and if they do, what kind of cultural or value system is incompatible with healthy multiculturalism?
Well, I mean, a value system, yeah, which has built into it certain discriminations is one example of something which is at odds with what we need in a diverse democracy. But I would also say that we mentioned this earlier, a kind of individual libertarianism, right, which can be a very strong value for some people, is also incompatible with a healthy democracy, because I go back to 1789, liberty, equality, fraternity. I think that the democratic society has to have all three of these. Fraternity, the word perhaps better is solidarity, right? Liberty, equality, solidarity. And I'm horrified by certain, trends in modern democracies, and perhaps stronger in the United States than even in Canada, where people have this libertarian stance. I mean, and even these figures that are very public figures, Elon Musk and people like that, there's the idea that I'm a creative person, so I should be let free for all restrictions. And there, with the two sides of what I consider ethics, I mean, this is not to have this acceptance that I need to have solidarity with others, not only is damaging to democracy, but I would argue that this is a very incomplete life. There's something missing in the life here. Not to have a body of people to whom one
You have a further?
solidarity.
Yeah, sure.
No.
Actually,
Did you want to follow?
yeah, okay. So I guess I have one follow-up question then. So there's also this story in the secular age about modernity being a particular time where for the first time there are these other available options. So I guess another kind of historical question I had was, to what extent intellectuals of the pre-modern period would have conceived of the possibility of these like other, reasonably pluralistic like forms of value systems. So for instance, like I'm particularly interested in Thomistic thought as an example. To what extent would pre-modern intellectuals have conceived of like other value systems as rationally possible or legitimate?
Almost like a multiculturalism before multiculturalism is the concern.
Yeah.
Do you see multiculturalism as a distinctive part of the modern social imaginary, or is it something that had prior iterations? That did come up in our discussion sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I mean, it was very, very narrowly conceived beforehand. What you have moments of multiculturalism exists in the past, at the court of Akbar in India. There were these meetings of, Jesuits on one hand, with mullahs on the other hand, and various Hindu wise men on the third, and they would sit and discuss in presence of the Emperor Akbar. And you get in something similar in the glory days of Andalusia and so on. But so here you have moments of that kind, but they're restricted in time, and they're restricted in personnel. I mean, it's just these great, if you like, spiritual leaders in each of their fields, discussing with each other in a atmosphere of mutual respect and so on. But so it was inconceivable. Yeah, there was, I guess, there also were in places like Andalusia and India under Akbar, a sense of, yeah, live and let live that occurred at that time. As a matter of fact, when I think about it, you know, these were, in a sense, epochs that foreshadowed our present epoch. I mean, and then they were broken into by you know, various elements in one or other of these religious communities that said, no, 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 it's impossible, that's intolerable, etc. So, but nothing got going as a generally accepted ethic for a whole society, that there should be such mutual respect and exchange, right? That's something that's only come with the modern world.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you. Perhaps the greatest part of our attention was focused on reading excerpts from A Secular Age, and we understood that the immanent frame is a conditions of the possibility of belief. It's part of the social imaginary that, like, say, currencies or countries, it remains an objective feature of social reality, even if it is subject dependent. And not really that easy to jump out of in that sense, the immanent frame as an individual, and not any easier, in fact, some ways more difficult than jumping out of using a currency or some other part of the social imaginary that gives it's a paper value or something like that. So many of our discussions in this text circled around the problem of being buffered versus porous selves, because we took it that part of the point you're making in that's very provocative in A Secular Age is that it's sort of part of our background condition, even in our designative view of language or the way we punctuate time. Even if we're religious people, we're in some senses participating in the immanent frame. And so Carson here had a question that wanted to go deeper into the issue of buffered selves. And
yeah. Hey, Dr. Taylor, thank you for meeting with us. Is the notion of bufferedness similar to Marx's conception of alienation in the sense that it is meant to be both sociologically descriptive of modernity, but also critical of it? Is overcoming bufferedness in some ways like overcoming capitalist alienation? And would a post-buffered self also live in a different, juster society? Or is this just a confusion of terms?
Yeah. No, I mean, I would take a real stand on this in the same way that I believe that your moral philosophy ought to have this ethical dimension. And I think that if you we've all developed buffered selves in relation to earlier forms of spiritual understanding, like the peasants in medieval Europe that saw the spirit of the woods as threatening them and so on. We don't even have the beginnings of a temptation to to have that kind of sensibility. But if we have the same manner of shutting out and giving no credence to any kind of spiritual direction, any kind of spiritual sense of something bigger than us, then I think, but this is, I freely admit that this is something that I'm not going to convince all of other people of, but I think that in that case, you're missing something very important and very, very profound. So the buffer self is complex because in one way, we had to have a certain kind of buffering in relation to earlier senses of the spirits in the world in order to be part of modernity. But that, for a lot of people, that's the end of the story. You don't need to ask further, are we living in an order of some kind which touches us spiritually and which is calling us to explore this order? That's where the big decision goes, the big decision that divides us very much in the contemporary world. And I'm, obviously on one side of this split. But I think it's very interesting because even people like me, those people like us, and on this Zoom now, who are looking for some kind of spiritual connection, even we have, it's rather like living in a bilingual society, being bilingual in a certain sense. There's a certain part of our lives, we're operating with people on certain projects like even projects in politics or projects in buildings, this or that organization or this or that building, where it's this dimension of ourselves is not relevant. So we're operating with others on the understanding that we're modern buffered selves, etc. But our cases, there is this kind of duality, and I think a lot of us are living with that duality. It is not that the duality is any way wrong or it doesn't mean that our spiritual life is in any sense damaged or reduced. But we have this kind of duality is a very common experience in the modern world.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Charles. And we've got next Adian, who has a follow-up question on this whole issue. I mean, it was helpful what you said there, that in some ways we speak two languages. Like we know when we're working on others on something imminent, to refer to the imminent frame as the common reference point, even if we're religious. And, then we go to mass, we go from whatever it is, negotiating the traffic light to mass. And then there's almost the double language. And Adian had a further question about bufferedness and the status of bufferedness.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here. It's a genuine honor and privilege, Professor. Thank you. So I'm just going to go ahead and read from here. So part of living in the seculum for Christians today means being with and among buffered selves. Is there a sense in which Christians need to not just exit, but perhaps enter into bufferedness to see it as part of our own condition? Does a self open to the transcendent need to empathize with and even enter into or experience bufferedness as part of actualizing or having a fuller, perhaps more authentic, well-articulate witness? We ask this because we see a tendency right now by Christians to simply other bufferedness as either someone else's problem or in a kind of neo-Manichaean rejection of the modern world, which precisely your philosophy warns us against.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, this is perhaps my experience is different, but I mean, you encounter other people, you're working with them, you even like them, they're friends, but they don't have any use, any place for this dimension, and maybe they don't even want to talk about it. So there's a whole problem here. I mean, a set of reasons here to be okay. Let's stay off this if it really hurts you. But on the other hand, when you start to ask, and some people are willing to talk about this who have no use for religion, why? And then sometimes what you discover is that they had the most, to them, very painful upbringing because somebody tried to push down their throats and make them feel terrible because, awful about themselves because they didn't share this particular dogma and so on. So you want to, sometimes you just want to say that, but that wasn't really what Christian faith was about, right? So there are all sorts of possibilities open for talking about this, and I think that's really worthwhile. I mean, several reasons. Just independently, if you can make a contribution to their having some kind of spiritual life, but leaving that aside, just to understand them, really understand them and see that maybe you see that this person who's always sort of Dawkins type person, sort of grumbling at the irrationality and so on. There may be, I don't know Dawkins himself, but I know somebody who's very Dawkinsian, and there's a lot of pain, legitimate pain behind that in his childhood. And you want to almost reach out.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor.
We ended our discussion with your provocative and widely read address on a Catholic modernity, on how to be Catholic in the modern world. Looking back, we can't help but notice the charity with which you render the modern self, not simply rejecting it, seeing in modernity a desire to be authentic, an affirmation of the ordinary, a desire to know, a desire to alleviate suffering. At the same time, you offer a sharp criticism of distinctly modern attempts at control, disengagement, atomization, the reduction of the world to mere machine. And you treat exclusive humanists with this same sort of charity affirmation, but also criticism. There's this like double move, which you're always doing. Even in your answers now, I hear a but that is almost like I almost want to call it the Hegelian but, where it's like, now here comes the other side swinging around. But we had some, but we had some questions here, not a Hegelian but, just a regular old but. And Noelle is here to ask about these questions about, okay, how far can you go in a Catholic modernity? Yeah.
Hi, Dr. Taylor. So my question is, as Professor Blakely just said, centers around a Catholic modernity. So in that you had written that our great historical temptation has been to forget the complementarity, to go straight for the sameness, making as many people as possible into good Catholics, and in the process, failing of Catholicity. Failing of Catholicity because failing wholeness. Unity bought at the price of suppressing something of the diversity and the humanity that God created. Unity of the part, masquerading as the whole. It is universality without wholeness, and so not true Catholicism. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are as to Catholicism being true and right, in addition to being the best framework option available. And then more specifically, how do you understand Catholic truth, that which would seem to remain unchanging, and its relation to interpretation and an authentic openness to diversity in a more practical sense?
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, I think that's a very good question. The first response to that is we're far from omniscient. We just don't really fully understand. For instance, now you probably have the same experience, but I have met, for instance, Buddhists who, whose stance on life deeply moves me, and I find, it's something that I can not just I agree with, but I can learn from, right? And how does this all fit together when I'm meeting the Dalai Lama, talking to the Dalai Lama? Should I be saying, no, but you haven't read the Bible? And no, he should be impertinent, even if I were, you know, Saint Teresa, and when I really have maybe something to give him a form of Christian faith, which really is very much to be admired. Even then, would it be appropriate? Maybe not. I think not. I remember seeing an extraordinary television discussion, debate, exchange between the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu. I don't know if you know who I mean. I mean the Anglican Archbishop of Cape Town, right? And they were sort of joking a little bit about their differences of theology or philosophy and so on. But there was a current of mutual respect and even love, and even a sense that they were for each other great encouragements to go on being what they were, right? That I found truly extraordinary. And that can be part of one's experience in the modern world. I mean, that's again, this comes back to an earlier question of, in the old days, would it be conceivable to have this kind of relation with somebody from another faith? And the answer would be not. I mean, it's extraordinary. I have lived quite a amount of time, and I remember the ecumenicism of my youth around the Second World War was, let's stop poor mouthing each other. This is between Christians and all nations. Let's stop tearing each other down, right? It was kind of the negation of the negation. But now I find that there are ecumenical contexts of meeting where it's the opposite. I mean, it's something very, very positive and which contributes greatly to your spiritual life. We moved all in the very, short space of 6 or 7 decades from merely getting over the negation to coming to see something really serious and deeply spiritually advancing for each of us in this kind of meeting. That I haven't probably cleared up any of the confusions you feel in your mind, nor in my mind, but this is, go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess I would wonder, on one level, I definitely agree. it's very important to acknowledge that there is goodness within other people and other traditions, and not to go in wishing that you could make the choice for them to be Catholic or whatnot. But then on another, it seems if you recognize Catholicism is true, would you say there is something wrong with, at some level, wishing that the other person were a Catholic as well?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely certain things, obviously, if other person says we don't owe anything to anybody else and so on, obviously, we with our understanding of agape and following Christ are right over against that. But if you take it whole spiritual traditions, which have great richness, there again, see, that's the point where I become dumb in every sense of the word. I don't know what to say, and I feel I sense my limitation very much. That's dumb in that sense. How these two fit together, and I know that there are possibilities of their actually encouraging and enriching each other. But I wouldn't be able to say, well, exactly in this dogma or in this particular set of opinions and so on. That's where that's where the problem arises or the problem doesn't arise. I'm extremely limited being. I feel my limitations at that moment, and I just don't know. It's a kind of agnosticism of.
Yeah, and I appreciate that's a very humble thing to say. And I mean, one thought I have is there's sort of two models to conversion. One is I get everyone in right now in the, like you beautifully said, in the 6 or 7 decades we have, which are very brief, to repeat my tradition. But that's actually kind of a fragile Christian position. I mean, if God really is all in all, then there's really no escaping that. And if you're growing in goodness and fullness, then I mean, I think there's a certain humility in, like you said, you go dumb in every respect before, like the Dalai Lama. You don't have to, it's not necessary for you. And Augustine is like this. I have many atheist friends, myself as a convert, who really worry, well, God's not saving these other people. But Augustine's position on that is, I don't know if he's saving other people. They're participating in being, so, no one really knows. In the last hour. I don't know if you want to comment on that. And then, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I mean, not just in a very, very Christian of the time framework. Even then, you can't say because of the last hour. But independently of that, even if someone radiates spiritual understanding and depth and bringing people together and opening their hearts, I fall dumb in both ways. I've been dumb in admiration and dumb in the sense of not being able to say where the line is between what I believe and what they believe.
Thank you, Charles. Do you have time for one more? Like, if anyone has a burning question, we kind of sequence these, or how are you with punctual?
I'm okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Like maybe 5 more minutes. Is that good?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
good.
Does anyone have I have some hands flying up here. Someone hasn't had a chance yet. We've got Aiden and we've got Patrick. So can we get those two in who have not asked their questions? Yeah, come on up, guys. Sorry, we had to do weird stuff with Zoom here. This is why we're trying to figure out how to not have various mics echoing. And
I know you've got a very good organization. I see everybody here, but I see one on one.
That's what we wanted. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. This is Aiden. Yeah.
Good to meet you, Professor. Thank you for being with us. So one of the things that struck me about your work and just understanding the development of your thought over so many decades is that we can't place you in one category, right? You enter one, you exit the other, you move around quite a bit into so many different lines of thought. And I'm a student of philosophy, and I find myself favoring things that appeal to the naturalistic arguments. I find myself favoring things which appeal to the opposite kind of arguments, right? I find myself wanting to rely on things in a variety of different philosophical traditions. And you're the kind of person who I think is interesting to learn from, right? Because you've gone through so many of them over your career. What's the most challenging part about navigating all of these? What do you find valuable in one and not valuable in the other, right? We can place you in things that seem are seemingly antagonistic to each other, but yet you find a way to build this coherent line of thought from so many different seemingly antagonistic areas of philosophy. So what does that look like? What's challenging about that?
Well, I think that the one important feature is that the future always challenges the past, or the present always challenges the past. I mean, I'm thinking of the decades in which I consider myself being a Catholic. I was brought up, but then in Quebec, there was such a narrow clerical church that it would almost chase you out. And then I discovered a certain theology, really the theology which is the background of Vatican II, and suddenly it made sense to me. And the thing is that life changes, you get older, you get a new situation, the older things that really triggered off don't touch you the same way anymore. So the faith has to, the point of contact has to evolve. And in your life, the point of contact with how I'm relating to, in this case, Christ and God, is changing all the time. And there are moments of painfulness when the earlier avenues don't quite work anymore for me, right? The sense of, and there's a really, one has, I mean, I have always in the background a sense of what it would be like to be really cut off, not to sense the work of God at all. And the bleakness of that. And that, I mean, when you grow older, certain kinds of bleakness come upon you, right? So it's a very moving target. I mean, changing position target in the way one is moved. things change. And, I wish you long life, but expect it's not always going to be the same relation, like channel coming down to you.
So we have to remind ourselves of that moving target. Right. No, I like that. I like that. That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Good to meet you.
And I think we had Patrick, beautiful, by the way, reminded me of narrow is the gate and, the way, and also be like a child. He not busy born is busy dying. I like Bob Dylan. So he not busy being born is busy dying. So Patrick.
Yes, well, thank you very much for your work and agreeing to be here. So many have described that we're living, most famously, American journalist Michael Pollan, amidst a psychedelic renaissance, as many people are having powerful qualitative experiences on substances, mainly psilocybin, that they describe as being beyond quantitative analysis, yet more real than anything they've experienced in life. So I kind of have a two-part question. The first is, do you think this psychedelic renaissance can be an avenue for a reemergence of the qualitative in this naturalist society dominated by the quantitative? And the second is, how do you think the Catholic Church can best approach this sort of second wave of mass psychedelic experience so it leads to people entering into the church rather than out of the church, as mostly happened in the first wave during the 1960s?
Well, yes, I mean, this is so far from my experience. I haven't had any of those, psychedelic experiences. I don't know how to judge it. I mean, obviously, and in some cases, it can turn out very badly, so that, that they come out of it very damaged. So it's beyond my capacity to give a general statement about the results of it, except to say that there must be cases where it has a positive result ultimately in their spiritual life, and cases where it has a negative result. But I mean, if only I understood the field better than I do, looking at it from the outside, I might be able to, say something contentful about
Though one thing, if I can put in that your philosophy has helped
Yes.
me see, is just the sheer presence of romanticism that it's in a way it's so pervasive that it's been taken up even in the mainstream, right? And so what you have here, like your notion of nova effects and people authentic searching. Of course, the first wave of psychedelics would have been the hippies, the counterculture. And one thing it took me a long
Yeah.
time, you helped me see this actually, is that the romantic movement started as an elite movement amongst poets, and and like they were taking like opioids and things like that. I also don't do this stuff, so the students know I'm very, yeah. But I'm confused by it as well, and I wouldn't have anything intelligent to say about. But one thing I do think your philosophy has helped me see is like the nova effects are these like sort of mass explosion of searching options that people are doing, some which might collapse under their own weight or not, not really hold up, right? And I don't know if you want to add
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's very important, that this nova effect, this sense that of the necessity of spiritual searching, of not sensing there's something there, but that none of the existing churches really, or communities really, gets you closer to that. So you go off in another direction, and you go off on a path. Now that, I mean, I've lived through an epoch in which that's been very important, and it's marked me very much. So that's that's very clear. But the specifically psychedelic side of things is something that I've never been tempted to join.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Charles. Yeah, your life is a gift, and God bless you. And thank you for speaking with us. I really think it was one wonderful way to end this week. You had a lot of wisdom you shared with us, truly. So, thank you.
Well, thank you all very much. I really enjoyed it. Yes. Okay. Bye.
Bye.